So this is a very strange presentation. I know you, all of them, you heard about the word degrowth. So I will try to make it an intimate conversation. So it's just between us. I prepared a lot of information for you. And at the end, I will show you in practice how we can use this concept to make changes in the real world. I have to start with a confession that in my head, I carry with me every day a conflict, which is between how I have to behave in the real world, like to have a good life and live a sustainable lifestyle. And on the other hand, is how the world is organized around us. Like people, some of us, like the top 1%, they consume more than the earth allows. And as much as I do for my own thing and my neighbors and my friends, I've come to the conclusion that we do not make an impact. So individual behavior and what we do day to day doesn't make a difference. I get the sense that I talk to my neighbors and many of them have the expectation that there's something they can personally do. They can not use plastic, recycle everything, all of that, which is good. We need all of that. But with the data I will show you proves that it's not enough, unfortunately. And we are at the time when the climate crisis is becoming so bad. The Secretary General of the United Nations just posted yesterday on Twitter that rich countries have to change the carbon emissions by the end of this year, 2022, drastically to avoid climate catastrophe. I don't want to sound like a doom kind of guy, but that's science. I mean, you've all seen the news with the heat in Europe, in Pakistan, in India, 50 degrees, 60 degrees. We haven't seen this before on Earth. So all this is in my head at the same time. I'm trying to feel good about myself that I'm doing the best I can. You know, I don't use a plastic bottle, but these are so little things. Let's go through some data, and at the end we'll talk strategy, because there are things that we can do considering all this that I just keep in my mind. This word degrowth comes from ecological economics. This is the definition. I will read it out loud so we have it recorded. It's a democratically deliberated absolute reduction of material and energy production in rich countries, so not in Africa, in Europe, North America, only here, which ensures well-being for all humans on Earth within planetary boundaries. So that means we have to decrease here in North America, Europe, so everyone on Earth can have a good life, including people in Africa and in Asia. So we have to change more here in North America, not them in the rest of the world. This is against perpetuating economic driven by growth and profit. So it's strictly against what we do now. And degrowth offers an alternative vision for societies centered on making a life instead of just making a living. You know, we're being taught in Canada, America, that you have to make a living, get a job, so you can live. This is way more than that. It looks at the whole life, not just how we go to work, how we get a salary so can just pay the rent and buy food. This is way more than that. It's about lifestyle, it's about engaging communities and cultures and religions, all that. It's very broad. So it also looks at ecological sustainability and social justice. So what does this mean? Ecological sustainable is you live your life, but you don't destroy the planet so future generations cannot live a life. And social justice is about rights for everyone to have access to what Earth offers. So all of us can have a decent lifestyle. Degrowth is based on principles of autonomy, solidarity, and direct democracy. So this is a very strong focus on deliberation and consensus between people. So we talk between us and decide what's the best life we want to get. We're not just waiting on the government or on companies to tell us you have to live like this, right? Bottom-up organizing is very important. It's what you guys do here, what we do right now. This is bottom-up organizing. We talk to neighbors and friends, we organize. Let's have this kind of society, and we do it. I'll show you in practice what we can do. It's very clear that degrowth is against capitalism. And I'm not a communist, let me make clear. By anti-capitalism is against how the economy is organized today, right? In Canada, North America, and Europe. Anti-productivism means we have to produce less So less things, objects, all that, cars, less production, and it's more well-being. It enhances your life without depending on things. And pro-social justice is what I just talked before, rights for everyone, and everyone has to have an equal voice in this. Otherwise, we are not going to make progress. So this is the definition. This is how capitalism looks like, okay? You have the profit motive at the center. Companies are motivated to make a profit, and that's their reason for doing a business. If you look at all companies in this system, North America, Europe, even China is partly capitalist. They are driven by making this profit. That's making more than you had before, and that pushes the whole economy to keep growing. Extracting more so we can produce more. That has to change. We have to move to an economy which it's called a well-being economy, where instead of profit at the center, we have the well-being of people. And well-being is what your common sense tells you it is. So having a good life, decent, with dignity, comfort, you have all the needs secured, housing, food, travel, transportation, access to services like education, health, all that, it's part of your well-being, right? No profit, well-being, and we stay within the limits of Earth. We will still need things like laptops, some TVs, some buses for transportation. We still need that. We don't want to go back into the ancient Stone Age. So we're still living the present, but we have to look at the limits of what we can do on Earth today. This is the green circle here, where all humans will live, prosperity, safety, and justice. That's where everybody will live, with lower limits and upper limits. So we have to consider limits both for minimum lifestyle and maximum. And degrowth is just is the tool that will change this system into that one. That's why I say it's like an instrument. It's like a tool. It's not an ideology like communism, socialism. It's not that. It's like an engineering algorithm. So it comes from physics, actually, from 50 years ago. Very quickly, this is how wealth is distributed now on Earth. If we take the world population and if we divide it into chunks of 20%, here at the bottom we have 1.6 billion humans. These people are the poorest 20% on Earth. These people earn 1.4% of the entire income on Earth. The next 20%, so this level, they make 2.4% of the world income, another 1.6 billion people. And these two levels at the bottom, there are people who earn less than $2 per day. So imagine how you can live that anywhere on Earth. But the next level, another 1.6 billion people, they make 5.6% of world income. Now, these are the next level, the second richest 20%. They make 9.4 of the world income. And now we come to the richest, the narrow band at the top. So there are 1.6 billion humans, right? These people, they take 81% of world income. And inside this level, this narrow band at the top, the wide thing, it's the top 1%. That's about 61 million people. Less than 1% of the world population, and they have the same amount of income as the poorest 56%. We can have the best life possible, sustainable and responsible, but it's not enough because you have those people here that consume many more times than we do, and no matter what we do, they still maintain that lifestyle. It's still going to ruin the planet for all of us. Just a little bit of history. This is what we had until today for the past 300 years, all based on growth. So population went up from under 1 billion to 8 billion today. GDP in trillions of dollars from 0.5 in the 1700s to 60 trillion today. That's the world GDP. Energy use went up 600 times. This is measured in exajoules. Water use in liters, exponential growth. These are the dams that you use for hydroelectricity. No dams in the 1700s, 35 dams today. Cars from 0 in 1900, 200 million in 1950s, over 1.4 billion today in the world. Paper in millions of tons produced, pretty much cutting down trees. Fertilizers in millions of tons consumed from 0 in 1900 to over 200 million tons. So this is Earth, humans, capitalism, advanced economies taking from Earth and making things, what we all have around us, this is the price we pay. So it has to come from somewhere. So we took all that from Earth and we made the life we have today. That's where it's coming from. Oh, and on the right side, it's how growth would look like if we maintain what we have today. For the system to stay alive, it needs to grow at about 3% per year. If it's under that, we call that a recession. Business will not make a profit. They will fire people, cause unemployment, just to keep up the growth. But if we keep the 3%, it's called the compound growth. If you maintain that every year, in 20 years, you double the economy. In 40 years, you quadruple the economy. And that's impossible. We are already past the limits what Earth can provide for us. I keep joking with my friends that no matter what we do, even if we don't do anything, this system will collapse by 2050 at the latest. And it's not an ideology, it's mathematics. Because this line, it's impossible to exist on Earth. This is the consequence of the growth. Carbon dioxide is now over 400 parts per million, which is very bad. Methane, which is even worse than CO2, it's also going up. Ocean acidification, temperature, nitrogen to coastal zone, this is bad for ocean reefs, coral reefs. Tropical forest loss, also it's exponential, so they keep cutting down the Amazon. Ozone loss, that also affects climate change, and nitrous oxide. So these chemicals, if we get to a much higher concentration, they will affect biodiversity. Plants, animals, rivers, waters, those are affected by the consequences of us using resources. So there's no way around it. If we take from the earth, we will modify the earth. So this is talking only about energy use. So currently we use these kind of resources to create energy for everything that we need, including construction and heating and cooling. We've been using biofuels, coal, crude oil, which is like what you extract from the tar sands, for example. Natural gas, this is what the Ukraine crisis is all about. Hydropower, nuclear, all of that, it's just a tiny line here at the top. It's still very small compared to the others, but growing. And it's on the same trend. This is the impact of the extraction of lithium in South America. Lithium is now becoming one of the most important resources needed today. For electric cars and our phones, companies are desperate to getting their hands on lithium, and a lot of it in South America. And this is what the local community, this is a video I will play, has to say about that activity.
La salina es para nosotros muy importante porque es nuestra madre y es parte de nuestra familia.
El agua es la sangre de la Pachamama.
Esa cantidad de agua, lo que se te habla para uso de la extracción de litio, no está acá.
Y entonces una madre no se lo puede romper, destrozar, ni tampoco venderlo.
This is the biggest crisis humanity has ever faced.
Climate change. Climate change.
El gran problema de las energías renovables es que son intermitentes.
They're not there all the time.
Desde ese punto de vista, el almacenamiento en baterías de litio es fundamental.
Essentially batteries.
The time for electrification has finally come.
Litio ahí en salares es el más rentable y de más fácil extracción.
The first thing you do is dig a hole in the ground.
Millones de litros de agua que se evaporan en un desierto.
Hay concesiones mineras sobre casi toda la puna argentina.
We have the second lithium reserve of the world.
Nos condenan a ser una suerte de zona de sacrificio, ¿no?
El gobierno tiene una deuda con nosotros.
Si el gobierno define que eso es importante para el desarrollo de la provincia, el gobierno va a avanzar.
A la empresa GEMSA le da como serían dueños. ¿Y cuándo hizo la consulta a la comunidad?
Estos territorios son habitados por nuestros ancestros y los vamos a defender como nosotros queremos.
Vamos a estar así, sellarlos, que la empresa que se vaya.
Nos vamos al extremo de liquidemos esto para salvar esto. ¿A quién? Si es la misma humanidad.
So this is from a documentary called In the Name of Lithium. It was made by an Argentinian film crew last year. So this is how lithium looks like right now. 80% of the world reserves are in Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. They require 2 million liters of water to produce 1 ton of lithium. There are 62 mining projects in Argentina, That many indigenous communities inhabit those lands. 55% of lithium carbonate, which is the ore, comes from the ground, goes as an export to the United States to make Teslas. And you need 4.5 kilograms of lithium for one electric car, which is the equivalent of 17,000 cell phones. Now let's look at happiness and money. This is a survey that was done in the 2017s and over the years. People were asked how happy they are. These many people said they are very happy, about 25% in the 1972. This is the United States, where the GDP was about $22,000. And happiness stayed at the same level over the past 40-something years, while GDP went up. They become richer, but they did not become happier. This is data showing that money does not make you happy, and these are Americans answering the question, are you very happy? This is America. Right now, American GDP is over $55,000 per person per year. That's how much America produces. And this is happiness in the world. So on the top, you have life satisfaction. The higher, the better. On the horizontal axis is GDP per person. Costa Rica is quite happy at 7, and their GDP is about $15,000 per person per year. So they are very happy with little money per person, but this is how much the economy produces. So they are not that industry intensive, but they are quite happy. Finland is a bit richer than Costa Rica, about $40,000 per person, also very happy. But Americans are less happy, but much richer. This GDP doesn't make a big difference in terms of life satisfaction. It looks like we are a rich country, even Canada looks like the United States, a bit happier, but it doesn't increase our satisfaction with life. It's supposed to be like that. That's why we have all this production and business and all these activities. It's not supposed to make us happier, but it looks like it's not making us happier. This is the philosophy behind Degrowth, is to think about happiness more than production just for the sake of production. And now this is what I was talking at the beginning, what causes me a lot of distress and conflict in my mind. How much do I need to change myself as an individual? How much the system needs to change, like government has to do things? And this is the typical recommendation that you hear that a person has to do to make a difference. This is from Climate Vanguard. We can switch to a plant-based diet. We can buy no more than 3 items of clothing per year. We can keep electrical products for at least 7 years, so not change the phone every 3 years or the laptop every 5 years or so. We can take no more than 1 short-haul flight every 3 years and 1 long-haul flight every 8 years. Get rid of the cars if possible and make one system nudge, that's what they call it, like voting for a candidate that promotes those values. This is all about individual change, behavior change. It doesn't talk much about changing the system, and I will show you what the system does. In Spain, the government said, okay, let's ban using the AC below 27 degrees Celsius. And that's the government trying to influence individuals. This applies only in public spaces, and for individuals, it's just a recommendation now. So it's not mandatory for citizens to do that. This is a quote from Jason Hickel, a Degrowth scholar. He says, environmentalism without class struggle is using paper straws while the rich take 9-minute flights in their private jets. On the right is an example from Drake, the famous singer. So he has a private jet, and this is on July 22nd. He flew from France in Nice to Toronto, and that's how many liters of gas he used, 55,000. It costed $100,000 just the fuel from France to Toronto, and he emitted in 10 hours, 155 tons of CO2. And then on the same day, he moved the jet from Toronto to Hamilton into a parking area, and the jet was empty. There was nobody on it except the pilot. You can see that in the media. And in 14 minutes from Toronto to Hamilton, that plane emitted 4 tons. Individual versus top rich, that's how you put it in perspective. This is how it looks like per person. The emission per person today is around 14 tons per year per person. But that's the average, including us and Drake. And he emitted 160 tons in 11 hours, but an average Canadian emits 14 in 1 year. It looks like it's going down. In reality, even if the average is going down, the total amount of materials used in the economy is going up. The emissions have not been decoupled, disconnected from what we use in the economy. It doesn't mean that it's looking better. It's actually going worse, even though the average is going down. This is around the world. The darker the color, the worse the emissions. So when it's the darkest, it's over 20 tons per person per year. North America is pretty bad. Europe is a little better, but also very bad. And the entire global south is much better than the global north. And the target to keep climate within 1.5 degrees for the world is 2.5 tons per person per year. Canada is 14 tons today. We need to go down to 2.5 tons per person to keep the warming under 1.5 degrees. We'll have to say to Drake, I'm very sorry, you have to get rid of your jet. It's not going to be feasible. That kind of inequality we have to dismantle in order to keep a livable planet. These are other countries in comparison. Indonesia and India are the closest to the target. Today, India is just a 3, Indonesia is 2.2, so they are okay today, but they have to maintain it for the rest of the century. This is the cycle of materials in the world, how much we use, how much we throw away, how much we recycle. Every year, we extract 92 gigatons, so that's billion tons, from the earth and put into the economy. So these resources, minerals, ores, fossil fuels, biomass, they are taken from the earth, processed, produced, provided, and they create needs for humans. And this is how they blend between each other. So you take minerals like stone, sand, clay, ores is like metals, including lithium, and they produce and they do manufacturing, they do construction, electricity, and in the end, they do housing for us, they do communications, mobility, healthcare, services, consumables. Those are the things that give us a life. And from all these materials, 14 gigatons are emitted in the air, 22 are dispersed on the ground and in the economy, 31 billion tons are added to the stock. Like we make buildings, we make cars. Buildings stay, they remain for us to use, and cars that you can use them, we can use them for many years. So that's added stock of stuff. And from this, 32 billion tons are just wasted. So they are not either not used or inefficiency, all that. They are lost. 22 billion tons are lost, and from those, only 8 are recycled. So they come back in the cycle. They are added to this. Next year, we're going to be repeat the whole cycle again with another 92 billion tons. So this is like the cycle of materials on Earth. Now, finally, some strategies. What does degrowth have to say about this? When it comes to strategy, degrowth is looking at all the aspects of life, not just the economy, but culture, communities, identities, what makes us different. And there are 3 modes of transformation that degrowth is suggesting, and they are called independent, from inside, and revolutionary. So the independent transformations, they involve building new forms of social empowerment on the margins of capitalist society. Usually our outside space is dominated by those in power. So that's one mode of transformation, and it can have 2 strategies. One is to reduce the harm that is being done today, and the other one is to transcend the structures, like escape the alternatives so we don't have to use what we have today. And examples, it's called resisting, climate justice demonstrations, worker collectives, community initiatives. So this is, if you want to transcend the system, it's called escaping. Some examples are eco-villages. So these are communities outside the city. There are many around the world, and they are off the grid. They make their own electricity, they make their own food, self-sustained, and they escape the system. They have nothing to do with our capitalist society. They are independent, and there are many around the world. They are just not being publicized that much. You can do a transformation from inside the system, and those transformations are aimed at changing existing institutions and are giving more power to the people within the current system. This transformation that's trying to reduce harm, it's called taming the system. And for example, here you will need the government that will come and say, let's put a cap on emissions. Nobody emits more than, 10 tons of carbon per year. But the government has to say, and it just slow down the economy, we give a law. and it's kind of taming the system, like it's trying to calm it down slowly. You can dismantle the system, so go outside it, and that will be policy that turns companies, all the businesses that we have today, into worker cooperatives, like democracies. And right now, all capitalist corporations are organized like mini kingdoms. You have a CEO at the top, and then a pyramid of people below him that take his orders and give orders to the people below. But there's no democracy. So the people at the bottom, I am working class as well. I'm at the bottom of a pyramid in a company. I have no right to say what's happening with the company. I cannot fire my boss, right? That would be a policy to change this kind of organization of business into a democracy. One worker, one vote. And this is from inside the system. And finally, revolutionary transformations, they seek a sharp confrontation with capitalism. And this is where it gets more, I don't want to say violent, but more confrontational. And that's where you have disobedience actions like the Occupy movement. You go and block banks, you block oil refineries, you block oil pipelines. So it's getting more engaging. Those are trying to reduce the harm. When indigenous peoples block a pipeline, they are trying to reduce the harm of pollution, right? But if you want to transcend the system, it's called smashing. Workers occupy a factory. When people block a coal mine, in South America, there are many examples when people occupy urban plots, so lots of land in the city that were just vacant, not being used. We have a bunch of here near Home Depot. It's a lot of land just not being used. In South America, people would just occupy that land and use it for the community. It's a bit revolutionary because it's against property rights, it's against the law, and etc. So it's a bit unorthodox, I should say. More about strategies. There are 4 approaches to these strategies. We can oppose the system, we can communicate about these ideas, what I'm doing right now. We can reform systems, or we can just practice, like live our life according to these principles. In each of those approaches, we have the key actors. When you oppose the systems, it's usually the activists and the citizens that do this. In Europe, you have the Extinction Rebellion groups, like they're on the streets like almost every day throughout Europe. You have the Sunrise Movement in America. They do a lot of demonstrations. So Google their names and you see they have a lot of activities throughout America. Those are opposing, right? So this kind of strategy is about opposing the destruction of Earth, and it's about creating counter-hegemonic power. So what does that mean? The power structures we have today in the economy, with corporations organized with the CEO at the top and governments, they have the power concentrated at the top. So sometimes we can struggle as much as we can at the bottom, but we will not make a difference because we don't have enough power. These movements are trying to flip the power and give the power to the people. It hasn't been done in history that much, but I have to give you an example from history. 1789 in France, they had a big revolution, the French Revolution. 1789, King Louis XIV was very bad, let's put it that way. He was exploiting the country. People rose up and they just attacked in Paris a garrison. And they won. We had only 5% of the Paris population that did this, took up arms, even pitchforks, and there were just a few guns back then. 5% of the people, and they toppled the government. A new government by the people came in, well, it's complicated, and the king was put on trial and executed in the end. It started with 5% of Parisians saying, enough, it's enough, let's change this, and they did. You oppose the system, you do demonstrations, strikes, direct action, civil disobedience, blockades, riots, sabotage. There are many ways to do this in practice. It depends on the context, the place on the world, the history, all that. And typical movements, as what I just mentioned. What's more interesting is artivism is about using art as a means of protest. Second approach, communication. And this is what degrowth is very good at it. So there are a lot of people that have been talking about degrowth, writing books, but they are mostly academics. It's very high level. What I'm doing here with you is trying to take all those concepts and just putting in a normal English so it would make sense to people. It's all about communication. We are not doing anything in practice yet, but that's one approach. So degrowth is doing that. They have seminars, they have summer camps and all that. They are very active. The idea of communication is just to inspire people to think differently, by telling stories, by doing presentations like this. So that's the approach that I personally am doing for the moment is using communication. And there's a lot of resources you can do with that. And in practice, commons is what I mentioned before, using the land and what's being around as inspiration for your stories. If you say, okay, we can build a camp outside Toronto based on these approaches, that's one way of communicating about that and putting into practice. Buen Vivir, the idea comes from South America, and it's about living well within nature. And decolonization, that's a very complicated topic. In a nutshell, is about not exploiting the global south, ending the colonization of Africa and South America today. The next approach is doing reforms. So that's mostly about governments. They have to do that. And it's transforming institutions. Activities are about political things like lobbying. For example, I talked to Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, about degrowth a few weeks ago. So I gave him that memo. The idea was for him to be aware of the idea and take it to his levels of connections. So it's putting the seed of reforming into the brains of politicians. I was trying to do a bit of reforming. Typical movement is the basic income movement. Probably heard about it. It's like basic income is being talked about now in Canada. It's a guaranteed income for every Canadian without questions and without qualifications. Every month you will get money in your bank account. Unions are also a big way in which you can do reforms, what's happening with Amazon and all that, so they can make a big difference. And in practice, degrowth is being done by people who actually live within planetary boundaries. Those eco-villages I mentioned, that's one way. In Toronto, we have transition towns, so it's like groups of communities in the neighborhoods who have gardens. They share, they are self-sustained, try to produce food locally in the city. In Toronto, I'm a big advocate of workshops and repair shops. I've seen one that was done just here with free bike repairs. So that is degrowth. That's how it would look in practice. The only idea is just you have to expand it, make it the norm throughout the country. Very quickly, these were just 4 approaches to degrowth from a strategic perspective. And next, I want to say about what's good and what's limited about each one. Opposing, it's good that it creates strong symbols and creates power from below. But it's limited situations when the government can use repression to stop your opposing. First Nations block a pipeline, the government just sends the RCMP or the army and stops them. So that's the limitation of opposing. You will have to confront power at some point. There's no way around it because it directly confronts the interests of the capitalist class. Communicating is good that it motivates people, it creates conversations, we talk, we get to know each other, but it also has its limitations, and I'm aware of that. It's mainly discourse, meaning that I'm just me talking. It's just words. People outside the room in the world, they have no idea what's happening here, and right now we don't make a change in the world, so it's a limitation if we don't take this outside. Reforming, it's good that it actually can make a difference in small increments, more renewable energy. It's good. You can say it's not good, but it's a small step. It can build alliances with other groups in society and civic organizations, but it's limited by the fact that it doesn't challenge how power is organized in society. You will still have a government organized like this at the top with the power concentrated at the top. Companies will still look like that with the CEO at the top. It doesn't challenge that. And the current system wants to preserve itself, is very resisting to change. The king in France, he opposed very much what people wanted in 1789. He didn't like change. Well, he lost in the end. But that's like the nature of power. It doesn't like to be taken away. That's a limitation of trying to do reforms. And in practice, I would just focus on the limitation that sometimes it's difficult for like an isolated eco-village to connect with other people. By definition, they're isolated, so they will not connect to others. So it's good and bad. So you have to look at all the aspects strategically. You also have strengths and limitations in all the approaches. In a way, you have to look at the wider angle all the time, no matter what strategy and approach you do, right? I will just go quicker through this. In practice, what's being done by movements. So these are places in the world where various organizations are using the opposing strategy to fight against fossil fuel companies, oppressive governments. These are just a few. I didn't get the chance to get more, but just to give you an idea that's already happening all over the world. This is an organization in Germany, so in Europe it's called Ende Gelände. In 2017, these are the protesters. They blocked coal mine in northern Germany, so they stopped the production of coal. They were successful, and there were about 7,000 people, so you don't need millions. Sometimes a small group of people can make a big difference. And right now, as we speak, this week, they are doing it again in Hamburg, between 9th and 15th of August, with the same goal, like to shut down some coal mines in Germany. This is just a few examples. There are so many more. This is a from inside transformation that I talked about before. This is trying to change the system from within. In Spain, people protested against austerity, rallied against high unemployment, welfare cuts, politicians, and two-party system in Spain, and against corruption in general and against capitalism. They were not thinking about degrowth, but through the way they were acting in practice, they were challenging the system. They were opposing the system, and they got some results from that. Of course, they didn't topple capitalism in Spain, but it did make a difference. More examples of actions that I haven't mentioned before. Maybe I talked about eco-villages. Each one separately is a way of putting degrowth strategies in practice. We talked about transition towns. Solidarity economy is not going to a Costco, for example, trading system locally within the community. It talks about not using regular money like dollars and creating an alternative to dollars. To give you some sort of an idea, you know the money at Canadian Tire that they use as a loyalty thing? That's a kind of money a company created for them. It looks like a currency because you can use it to purchase. It's not real money, and it only works inside the company. An alternative currency in a community may look like creating an alternative dollar, let's say a Toronto dollar or something, only used in the community in parallel to the Canadian dollar, with the purpose of creating a sustainable and a solidarity economy, like people helping each other. I go to the local business, I help them, and they buy from me and so on. So it's all local. We do not depend on outside economy. And there are many other kinds of activities. Each one is very interesting. I don't have time to go into details. Maybe we can talk about them later. And these are my ideas for Toronto. I call them my top favorites that I would like to do in Toronto. So the first one, I call it retrofit cooperatives for residential buildings funded from property taxes. So what if we took the property taxes, instead of them going to the city, they stay in the building and they are used to retrofit the building to make it sustainable. Solar panels on the rooftops, on the walls of the buildings. Replace the heating based on natural gas, as it is right now in most buildings, with heating based on electricity, which is renewable. And that can be done with property taxes. We can do it ourselves. So you can make a cooperative in a building. You apply to the city with a proposal. Let us use the taxes to do this retrofit, and you also apply for grants. I like the idea of a 3-minute wait, free public transit, and ban on personal cars in downtown core. What if we had public transit, buses and trains that would come every 3 minutes and it's free? It will help people use transit more and put less pressure on people wanting to use personal cars, because people use personal cars today in Toronto because it's big, long distances, and because public transit is not reliable enough. If you have to wait 15-20 minutes for a bus, you lose interest and patience. You need to get to work. I would rather take my car, if I have one, if I can afford, rather than wait that long. In London, they closed Zone 1, which is the center of London, to private cars. It's only buses and taxis in London. Congestion went down, so less traffic. It's more pleasant, less pollution, and people can get around, so it's easy to move around. You don't need each person to drive their own personal car everywhere in the city. But you have to do this both at the same time. You cannot ban cars and not have buses. You have to do both at the same time. This strategy is more about opposition. We can do major lawsuits against polluting corporations in a nutshell. One good example is Nigerian fishermen. They sued the Shell Corporation in the Netherlands and they won because Shell was polluting the delta in Nigeria so badly, it ruined the livelihood of fishermen. One idea I really care about a lot are the neighborhood consumer councils. If I were to do something tomorrow, I would start with this one. People like us here in the room and more, we can get together and form a consumer council, and we can petition the retailers in this neighborhood. I'm just thinking about Costco, just one example. And it's us telling them nicely, please do not sell products based on plastic, palm oil, or essentially that are not renewable. It's just, we give them a letter, we give them time to think about it for a few weeks, and if they ignore us, we can ramp up the action. In Europe, they would probably block access to that building. I don't want to say that we should block the parking lot of Costco, but if they do not respond to the demands of the community, we should probably go next to Costco on the sidewalk, public property, with signs, and tell everybody that we petition Costco and they refuse to stop selling products that are damaging to the environment. Palm oil, just palm oil alone, it's almost in everything. It's in Rice Krispies, it's in cosmetics, and palm oil is very damaging to the environment. Just Google search palm oil and you will see how the crops look like. That's one idea how we can action today. We can request the city to fund free repair shops, like the bike repair shops, with taxes on retailers who sell products with planned obsolescence. Planned obsolescence are the products that by design are meant to break down. I had the fridge, it was 15 years old in my condo. It broke down last year. In Romania, we had fridges that lasted 30 years. Were they not supposed to get better today? We have better technology now, but they break down after 15 years. So I had no choice, I had to buy a new one because I could not find parts for the fridge. So there was another $1,000 down the drain, because I needed a fridge to keep food, right? But they are meant to be like that. Phones are meant to break down after a couple of years, so we buy another one, and that's more consumption. That's how capitalism works. And not to mention how expensive it is. Yeah. If we told retailers, okay, I'm gonna buy the fridge from you, Costco or Home Depot, but you have to guarantee that if it breaks down in the next 20 years, you repair it for free. I don't want another one. So that's the idea. I don't want another fridge because that means more production, more resources from the earth. You repair the one I bought from you and make it work for 20 and 30 years and for free. So that's about planned obsolescence. They are planned to be obsolete by design. We have to fight back very strongly against that. I would like to see a major degrowth alliance with all the civic groups who fight for social justice and environmental justice. A lot of organizations already do these things, so this is not quite new. A lot of them are doing this in various ways. I would like to see all of us uniting towards a positive goal, which is having a well-being economy. Get rid of capitalism, have well-being for everyone. So this is a huge opportunity for an alliance around these ideas with all the groups in the city and the community. And in the end, so one idea that I fit on this page is to demand the city and Ontario to legislate work time reduction. So working less, I would say up to 30 hours per week for corporations gives us more free time to enjoy life. Produce less by working less. Pretty much. They are tied together. The time we spend in factories and at work, I work in administration, and it's too much. This time we spend at work, it's adding to this kind of production that we want to stop. By working less, it's a first step towards less production and less things and more enjoying life, more time with family, more time to dream about what you would like to do with your life. And by working less, I mean working less to produce. You can work more for yourself if you want to paint or write poetry. I consider that work. What I do now, to me, is kind of work. I enjoy it. I'm not working for a corporation. I'm pretty much working for you. That's the idea to work time reduction. So these are just some ideas that we can do here in Toronto. I will move quickly through. These are some resources about degrowth. You don't have to read them, but I'm just letting you know they are there. I can send them to you later if you want. These are books. I read half of them. The one in yellow I talked about last time. The data I presented today comes from this one, Degrowth and Strategy, most of it. That was just published last week. But there are a lot of books, so there's a lot to learn. But I have to say, almost all of them are a bit difficult. To be honest about them, they are written by academics and professors. The language is not that accessible, so it takes some patience. a lot of patience in some cases, but they are full of very good ideas. Even the language is a bit difficult. But if there's one that I recommend, is this one. Less is More by Jason Hickel. It's the same person from which I took the quote. This one, I think it's at the library. It's very popular. It was a bestseller. And it presents these ideas in a very accessible language. So if you want to take a picture, I can pause on this screen. These are some ideas for a later discussion that I know in detail. I talked about democracy at work. It means electing managers and executives democratically. So we elect the boss, not the boss hires us. And if the boss doesn't satisfy the organization, the workers will fire the boss, not the opposite. So it's reverse democracy. I have to say it's not utopic. This is done in practice. It's called the worker cooperative. Fifth largest company in Spain is organized like this. It's called the Mondragon Corporation. They have 100,000 employees, $90 billion in revenue every year, and all the managers are elected democratically by the workers. It's all a democracy. Another idea I like is the universal basic income. The liberals and the NDP, they call it the guaranteed livable income. It's the same thing. I would like it to be around $1,500 to $2,000 per month per person. Every month, every citizen gets this amount without asking for it, without needing to be employed. So no conditions whatsoever. That's why it's called a guaranteed livable income. Social inheritance is an idea that comes from a French economist. Giving $200,000 at age 25 for each person. So when you turn 25, the government gives you $200,000 to start the life. No debts. It's called a social inheritance. So you can use that money to start a business, to buy a house, whatever, towards education. Not student debts, not mortgages. You start with something. It's a very well-developed idea. There's money for this. They come from taxes and from putting taxes on large inheritances, on billionaires and that. So simple living is it's having a lifestyle that has in mind that carbon footprint I mentioned. So trying to live within 3 tons per person per year, like try to drive less, eat meat less, as much as you can. You know all these things, so it's not new, because this talk is more about strategy. Minimum and maximum income. This is about setting limits for decency and dignity. I put it at $25 per hour and also maximum. So nobody should make more than $150 per hour. Nobody makes more than that. This is one of the most radical ideas in degrowth. It's not new, so it's been discussed in Europe, in many countries over the past 30 years. Some countries are coming closer to this idea. First, you have to talk about it and ask for it. If you don't talk about it, it will never happen. But limits are very important. Limits on income and limits on wealth. So the minimum wealth will be the social inheritance. Everybody will have a minimum of that much money, and a maximum. Well, $3 million is a bit radical. It comes from a French philosopher. But billionaires, bye-bye. We will no longer have billionaires. Billionaires do not need it. How big of a house do you need to live? So degrowth for small business is making small businesses around these concepts. So these are just ideas for later discussion. Each one is a big topic, but I was just giving you food for thought. Degrowth for housing, how we can have housing constructed around these ideas. Rent control should be a big thing. You should not pay more than 50% of your disposable income towards rent. Not like it is now, sometimes a half of your income goes toward, even more, yeah. That's one thing. And housing should be considered as a right, like healthcare. Housing right now is like a commodity. It's like a phone or a car. Buyers and sellers, you have a market. The condo now is $700,000 because of the market. You know, the market went up the price, or speculation, or investors. So that market should go away, and housing should be made as a right. People need a place to live in. You know, it's like people need right to education, right to healthcare. The same should be a right to live in a place. Various ways to do this. This is an idea for later discussion. And one that I fit on the screen is degrowth for food. It's mostly about agroecology, like you can call it organic farming, but done in such a way that it can feed a city like Toronto. We cannot have farms in the city that feeds everyone, but food provisioning can be done in such a way around the city that we don't have to import avocados from Mexico or South America. Transportation itself is very bad to the environment. So we should try to be local as much as possible, organic as much as possible. In a way like traditional farmers were using. I made an entire video on YouTube about this. Like, there's a lot of strategies, how you use fertilizers, how you alternate crops. So degrowth can apply in many areas. This is a survey. If you want to participate, it will tell you how ready you are for degrowth. If you scan this with your phone, like pretend you take a picture, there are only 5 questions. I'll leave it on the screen because I'm done with the presentation, so I'll stop now. So thank you all for your attention.